There was a moment, not that long ago, when Jarryd Hayne could do something no other player in Australia could do. He'd get the ball on his own line, and 40,000 people would stand up, not because something might happen, but because they knew it would. They called it the Hayne Plane, and for a few years, it felt like nothing on earth could ground it. Then, somehow, the kid who had everything decided that wasn't enough. He walked away from it all at the peak, while he still had it to chase something almost nobody believed he could reach. What happened next would turn one of rugby league's greatest stories into one of its strangest. This is the story of Jarryd Hayne, the rise, the gamble, and the fall nobody saw coming. Before any of that, Jarryd Hayne was just a kid in a red brick housing commission home in Minto, in Sydney's southwest, raised mostly by his mum Jodie. Money was tight. His dad, Manoa Thompson, had been a rugby league player himself, good enough to play for South Sydney and the Auckland Warriors, and to represent Fiji, but he wasn't around much in those early years. For a long time, it was just Jarryd, his mum, and his siblings. But even as a little kid, something was different about him. Before he ever picked up a footy, Hayne was already breaking records. He still holds the New South Wales Primary School under-8 and under-9 100-metre sprint records. Teachers, coaches, anyone who saw him run said the same thing. This kid is fast in a way that doesn't make sense for his age. By the time he hit his teens, footy had taken over completely. He dropped out of high school early. Most kids his age were worrying about exams. Hayne was worrying about whether he was ready for first grade. And by 2006, at just 18, he made his NRL debut for the Parramatta Eels. He wasn't the finished product yet, but anyone who watched him in those early years could see it: the footwork, the speed, the instinct to find space where there wasn't any. People didn't just think Jarryd Hayne might become a good player. They thought he might become the player, the one who defines a generation. Fast forward to 2009, and what happened that year still doesn't quite make sense, even now. The Eels were a disaster. 12 rounds in, they were second last on the ladder. No finals hope, nothing, and then Jarryd Hayne happened. From round 19 onwards, Hayne was named man of the match 6 times in 7 games. The Eels won 7 straight. Premiership-winning coach Phil Gould went on TV and called him, flatly, the best player in any code of football in Australia. Not the best fullback. Not the best in the MRL. The best player in the country. Full stop. Parramatta went from second last to the grand final, the first 8th-placed team in history to make it that far. They lost to Melbourne in the end, but by then it almost didn't matter. Hayne had already done the impossible. He finished the year with more running metres than anyone else in the league, won the Dally M Medal, Rugby League's highest individual honour, and became a household name overnight. And it was around this time that the Hayne Plane was born, that celebration, arms out, gliding across the try-line like he was taking off. Crowds started doing it back at him. Kids in backyards across Australia were doing it. For a couple of years, Jarryd Hayne wasn't just a star. He was the most must-watch player in the country. By the end of that incredible run, Jarryd Hayne had conquered rugby league, won everything there was to win, become the face of the game. The problem was for Hayne, that wasn't the finish line. It was the start of a much bigger question. What do you do once you've already done everything? In October 2014, fresh off another Dally M Player of the Year award, Jarryd Hayne stood in front of cameras and announced he was retiring. Not injured. Not in trouble. Just done. He was walking away from the NRL to try out for the NFL. No Australian top-flight rugby league player had ever done this. Not once. And the numbers made it even harder to believe. Hayne was reportedly being offered close to $2 million a year to stay in the NRL. The contract he ended up signing with the San Francisco 49ers? The NFL minimum, around $435,000. He was taking a pay cut of roughly 75% to play a sport he'd never played professionally, with no guarantee he'd even make the team. Critics didn't hold back. Commentators called it career suicide. Pundits said he'd be cut in pre-season and come home embarrassed. Even Hayne admitted it himself, standing in front of the 49ers logo. This is a huge risk. I'm taking a massive leap of faith. And then against everything anyone predicted, he made the team. 53-man roster. An Australian rugby league legend, in an NFL jersey, on an NFL field. Most kids in this country dream of one day making the NRL. Jarryd Hayne had already done that twice over. He wanted something nobody from here had ever managed. And for one moment, impossibly, he had it. But here's the thing about taking off that high. Eventually, you have to come back down. Hayne's NFL season ended with 17 carries and 52 rushing yards across 8 games solid for a guy with zero American football experience, but nowhere near enough to build a career on. Before the next season even started, he walked away again, this time to chase a childhood dream of playing rugby sevens for Fiji at the Rio Olympics. He didn't make the squad. So, in 2017, the superstar came home. Gold Coast Titans, on a deal worth $1.2 million a year. The headlines were the same as ever: the Hayne Plane returns. But on the field, something had changed. The Titans finished second last. Fans who once stood and cheered started doing the math out loud at his salary. Commentators pointed out, Hayne was earning roughly $3,300 every single time he touched the ball. One Gold Coast supporter put it more bluntly to a local paper: have a look at how his teammates celebrate when he scores. They don't. His own coach, Garth Brennan, tried to stay diplomatic. He's an exceptional talent, there's no doubt, Brennan said. But I watched a player who didn't look like he was enjoying his football. By the end of that year, Hayne asked for a release. He wanted to go home to Western Sydney, back to where it all started, back to Parramatta. The Titans let him go without a fight. The superstar was back in the NRL. The jersey was the same. The nickname was the same. But the Hayne Plane wasn't taking off anymore. It was just taxiing, and nobody, including Hayne himself, seemed totally sure why. That 2018 season at Parramatta would turn out to be the last full season Jarryd Hayne ever played in the NRL. And the reason has nothing to do with form, or fitness, or footwork. On the night of the 2018 NRL Grand Final, a night when most of the country was celebrating, Hayne was at a house in Newcastle. What happened there became the subject of a criminal investigation, and then a court case. And then, after that, another, and another. It took 3 trials over several years. The first ended in a hung jury. A second resulted in a conviction that was later overturned on appeal. In the third trial, in 2023, a jury found Jarryd Hayne guilty of sexually assaulting a woman in her own home. The judge said the woman's account had been tested at length in court and had not been found wanting. In her victim impact statement, she said the attack had left her feeling, in her words, like an object that he'd looked straight through her. Hayne was sentenced to prison. He has always maintained his innocence and continued to fight the conviction through the courts. But as of today, that conviction stands. And it's now an inseparable part of how Jarryd Hayne's story is told. Whatever else Jarryd Hayne achieved on a football field, this is part of his story too. And for the sport that once couldn't get enough of him, it changed everything. So what do we actually take from all of this? For a few years, Jarryd Hayne was about as good as rugby league has ever produced a kid from a housing commission street in Minto who became, by the testimony of people who'd seen everything, the best player in the country. He took a gamble that no Australian had ever taken, on a different continent, in a different sport, and somehow made it work, at least for a little while. But talent was never the part of Jarryd Hayne's story that was ever in question. What this story actually shows is something else: that being the most gifted person in the room doesn't decide how your story ends. The choices made off the field turned out to matter just as much as anything that happened on it. Maybe more. These days, when people talk about Jarryd Hayne, the Hayne Plane isn't really what comes up first anymore. And that gap between what he was capable of and how it actually ended is exactly why his story still gets talked about, all these years later. What do you think? Was Jarryd Hayne the most talented player Australia ever produced? Let us know in the comments, and if you want more stories like this one, make sure you're subscribed. We'll see you next time.